Thanks very much, Frank. Thanks. That's well understood. Okay. Well, I wish Dermot were here because I wanted to thank him and all the other organizers for inviting me and organizing this really interesting program. Please convey that back to him. One thing that you'll notice in this short presentation is that I'm going to do my best to not say anything terribly specific about Brexit. This is for two reasons. One is it's as a courtesy to, I guess it's Thomas Sebastian, who will be addressing this subject later on. But the real reason is that I love my job in the World Trade Organization, and I'm not yet ready to give it up. And in the WTO, we do, we care obviously passionately about maintaining a good state of trade relations in the world. But something like what precisely is going to govern trade between the UK and Europe in the future is, first and foremost, a sensitive matter for them to work out, and also in a way that's acceptable to all the WTO members. So now, what I am going to do, though, is I'm going to try to talk about what we see as the global picture regarding procurement reform and the role that the World Trade Organization Agreement on Government Procurement plays in supporting that picture. In a way, I think that the effect of this will be to show, why we think it's really incredibly important that one way or another, the UK continues to be involved front and center in this picture and to contribute to it and to help to shape it. So, and may I mention also two things. One is my colleague Anna has been with you all this week. Many of the things that I will say have been worked out jointly with her. She's a very close collaborator. And I've also left on the table over there about a dozen copies of a paper that we wrote recently, which is sort of a long form version of my slides. Okay, so my question is the WTO Agreement on Government Procurement becoming really a pillar of the world economy and a pillar of procurement reform? And I believe it is, and now I'm going to recite sort of several reasons. You can make up your own minds, and I look forward to being challenged on any of these. So the first thing is that, as I see it, the revised WTO Agreement on Government Procurement, this is the one that was renegotiated and concluded in 2012, came into effect in 2014, and it's the one that other countries in the world are now coming into. This, in my submission, and it's really our joint submission with Anna, is a 21st century trade agreement. What do I mean by that, and on what basis do I say that? Well, first of all, I submit that it is a principles-based agreement. I tried to listen carefully to who was it? Simon's brief but penetrating discussion on sort of a rules-based system versus a principles-based system. And I actually think, what we have in the GPA is a principles-based system. It's based on three principles: non-discrimination, transparency, and procedural fairness. And really pretty much everything in the agreement is centering on one of those principles or the others. And we also think it's a 21st century agreement because it brings together concerns about trade and market access with concerns about good governance. And it really recognizes that, especially in this subject area of government procurement, simple guarantees of market access, I mean, a simple sort of fiat statement that you shall not discriminate would not be enough to establish a basis for trade without the accompanying disciplines on transparency. That's how suppliers become aware of procurement opportunities. And similarly, without the disciplines on procedural fairness. So the third point would be to simple, factual, growing membership of the agreement. And I'm going to show you some details about that. And the fourth point would be the diversifying reasons for joining this agreement. This agreement, back in its predecessor form, was originally conceived as a kind of market access tool. This was at the conclusion of the Tokyo round of multilateral trade negotiations a long time ago now. It was conceived as a market access tool, and it was really a small club of developed countries, excuse me. And now what we're seeing is a lot of transition economies want to come into this agreement. In the future, more traditional developing countries will be coming into this agreement, and they're coming in for different reasons. So I want to kind of present that a little bit. But just to mention sort of en passant, the other sort of contextual reasons why this agreement, the GPA, is becoming more important within the WTO itself, and I submit also as a kind of underpinning of global procurement reforms. Well, one of them is simply the burgeoning of global infrastructure needs in developed and developing economies. Another is greater awareness in development, in the world of development, and in the World Bank, in the G20, the importance of good governance as an underpinning of development. Some of the world's leading development economists are now really saying that, you know, development, it's not the same as growth, and really we cannot have development without attention to good governance and institutions. I think that's part of the reason for the interest here as well. The GPA, many of you will know this, is also, in addition to being the GPA itself, which covers 47 WTO members, it's also the template for a large set of regional and bilateral trade agreements that embody, that really are based on essentially the same text with a few minor variations. So what that means is it isn't only 47 countries that are covered by the GPA. It's a larger set of countries that have opted in through their regional trade agreements. We also have a situation now where we have very good synergies with the UNCITRAL model law, which Carolyn Nicholas mentioned this morning, and also now with the new World Bank procurement framework. When I came into my job, my present job 10 years ago, it was abundantly clear to me that the World Bank and the World Trade Organization were on completely different wavelengths. Okay, and I'm not saying that they've perfectly converged yet, but actually we're coming together. It's a process, and we're getting onto a much better sort of platform in terms of coherence in the requirements of the WTO's treaty and the World Bank's guidelines. And that's a really, really super important thing. As Carolyn pointed out this morning, I mean, it creates an incredible state of cognitive dissonance if the WTO is saying we want you to do this in order to join the WTO and be a part of this family, and the World Bank is saying something completely different. And we did have that situation. We have it less now, and I'm super happy about that. And the last contextual factor I want to mention, and I think this will ring a bell, is the GPA is growing, and within the GPA, the scope for liberalized trade in procurement markets is growing. But outside of the context of the GPA, protectionist pressures are growing. And I think I don't need to mention even some of the jurisdictions I'm speaking of. It's perfectly obvious to everyone that in the world today, there's a lot of renewed pressure to buy national and source national. And in that context, the world needs its instruments to preserve market openness. And, I also would submit, it's kind of going out on a tangent, but in my submission, one of the reasons that the Great Recession beginning 8 years ago or 9 years ago did not become the second Great Depression was because the world did have in place, an imperfect but still a reasonably solid framework to prevent, the erection of Smoot-Hawley kind of tariffs and other market closing measures. Touch wood, that situation will continue. I don't know if you say touch wood in the United Kingdom. It means we hope for the best. So I did say it is important to talk about and inform you of the membership of this agreement and who is coming into it. It's still mainly a developed countries club, but you'll see notice we have some very interesting new members: Ukraine, Montenegro, Armenia, Moldova. These are countries that have all come in very recently. They have a different set of challenges that they have to work with. In many cases, as they came into the agreement, they acknowledged to myself, to my colleagues, and to the other members and parties to the GPA that they have problems of governance, severe problems of governance and corruption in their procurement systems. And they said that one of the reasons they wanted to come into this was to consolidate and cement in place the reforms that they were implementing and actually deliberately subject themselves to increased transparency, disciplines, and accountability at the international level as a way of reinforcing domestic reforms. I think it's a very interesting thing, and I think this will be true for a wider set of countries that is coming in. And you'll see, and I think most of you know this, but anyway, China is going to come in. Sometimes people say to me, Rob, China started this process 8 years ago. When is it actually going to conclude? In my judgment, it's taking certainly no longer than it needed to take. And it's a transformative development for a country like China to come into the WTO government procurement agreement. It takes a lot of institutional change, a lot of consciousness raising, a lot of human capital formation. And to me, it's no surprise that this didn't happen overnight. And we believe it is going to go forward. And our latest signals from China are very positive about that. You'll see also that Russia is now there on the list of countries that are committed to and actually have formally started the process of acceding to this agreement. Obviously, that's going to be another very challenging one. And, we'll need the WTO. The WTO, I think most of you know this, but it's worth saying. The WTO is not an organization that can do all the necessary work itself. It actually needs, the support. We need the support of the whole international procurement community to make some of these, changes take place and take root and work for the benefit of the participating countries. It's one thing to, legally bring one of these countries that we're speaking of into the GPA, and I believe that does serve a purpose. It does create important new legal and political levers that can be used to implement change, but by no means does the simple act of joining actually suffice, by no means. And actually the work of building human capacity and changing attitudes, adjusting legislation, all of that has to continue and actually becomes even more important, not less so. Okay, so this is enough said on the membership for the time being, except that do see that India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia have recently become observers to this agreement. So I don't think it's out of the question that eventually some of those will actually join as parties as well. And so you can see that eventually this thing called the GPA, which started out as a sort of private members club for market access, is progressively becoming a tool that is helping to create and incentivize procurement reforms around the globe. Okay, now, but that's my point. diversifying reasons for developing and emerging countries in particular to join this agreement. Well, the traditional reason, of course, was assured access, to provide assured access to the other parties' procurement markets. This is the traditional kind of mercantilist basis for trade negotiations in the WTO, and that remains an important consideration. But I don't really think, if you think, and that, you know, certainly for China, for Russia, for the other biggies that join, that is an important consideration. But it's probably not so much of a consideration for many of the smaller transition economies that are joining. And for them, I think you actually have to look further in my list of motivations to really understand why they are doing this. And, you know, so reason number 2 is to provide a needed template or political springboard for procurement reforms. And as I said to you, amongst those countries that have come in recently in Eastern Europe, really they're quite explicit about this with us. They're saying, you know, we want desperately to reform our procurement system, but we can't succeed in doing that just for domestic reasons alone. And the only, you know, so we look to this international system as a way of galvanizing the political support to implement the reforms that we want to implement for our own sake. And then also, you know, providing a degree of international validation and ongoing support and mentoring. So all of this certainly will lead to, thanks. Point number 3, which is possibilities for achieving enhanced value for money in the acceding country's own procurement systems. And that comes, of course, through enhanced competition and secondarily, I believe, some assistance in grappling with corruption problems and strengthening governance. Though again, it's not the simple act of joining the GPA that solves all of your problems in those areas. You know, the work of human capacity formation has to go on. I think that for some of these countries, the 4th reason I have there is quite important, and that is strengthening incentives for inbound foreign direct investment. And how does that work, you might say? Well, the whole economics literature on the investment decisions of multinational enterprises says that they attach quite a lot of importance to the rule of law and to assurances of transparency, guarantees against unfair seizure of assets and things like this. And that's also part of what the GPA does. It puts in place a minimum set of transparency standards backed up by mandatory independent domestic review, or as you call them, remedy systems. And a 5th reason is for some countries, and this is interesting too, I think, is once countries are in, then they have a say in resolving the terms of accession by other countries that come into this agreement. And actually, I definitely think that is a consideration in the minds of negotiators from Central and Eastern European countries. They want to get in before their neighboring countries get in, so that they can ensure that when those other countries come in, it's on a set of terms that they'll all benefit from. I am conscious. It says 2. So here's 1. I just think there's only 2 slides, this one and the next one. I also think that the costs of joining this agreement, the challenges involved are coming down over time. And why is that? More than anything else, it's the second factor there, which is that a lot of countries are doing these reforms anyway, or at least they have the reforms on their minds. They want to implement reforms for their own sake. So it becomes then not so much a proposition of, I really don't want to implement these reforms, but the WTO is making me. It's more like the 2 are going kind of hand in hand. I come in my last 1 minute to my very last slide and closing thoughts. And one of them is, the first one is the internationalization of the public procurement debate and the issues that you're talking about in your really superb conference and very interesting one are being talked about all around the globe. They certainly, and I know many of you know this because you also go to these countries that I go to, but the same debates are taking place in Malaysia and Vietnam and Argentina and Tajikistan and a whole lot of other countries that, so, you know, at the very least, at the level of ideas and consciousness raising and human capacity and networking and human capacity formation, we need to help each other. I think there's a lot at stake for the world here, not only in terms of global commerce, but in the struggle for good governance and the fight against corruption. Principles versus rules, I've already said, I think actually the GPA is your principles-based agreement or your template for principles-based procurement reforms. I want to say something about e-procurement tools. And this may simply reflect the fact that I'm a new sexagenarian. And that is, but that is that I think as great as they are and as seriously important as they are and as much hope that they offer, they still have their limits. And I'm a little bit concerned that some countries are investing in e-procurement systems as a perceived substitute for investing in the human capital and professionalizing their own procurement services, because I think the human judgment factor is going to remain super important for a long time to come. And that's my concluding point, which I already said. So thanks a lot for listening.